Section 12 of Richelieu by Joseph Gustave Masson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 5, Foreign Policy, Part 1. Richelieu's foreign policy is one of the most noteworthy subjects we have to consider in our biographical sketch of the great French statesman. We must examine it somewhat in detail. The measures he had taken against the aristocracy were just, no doubt, but still there was about them a kind of relentless severity which might sometimes seem positively brutal. In order to soften the unfavourable impression they were likely to produce, he felt himself bound to adopt a system of foreign policy which would conciliate public opinion by its patriotic character, and by the evident desire it showed of restoring France to its proper position amongst the nations of Europe. There were, besides, the absolute necessity of giving occupation to a number of restless and daring men, who, prevented by their social position from carrying on trade or business of any kind, must find on the fields of battle against the enemies of their country a scope for that energy which they no longer dared to employ in fomenting intrigues at home, or in fighting duels at the Place Royale. An opportunity was not long wanting, or rather it existed since the death of Henry IV. The destruction of Spanish influence had been the Béarnase's policy. He saw France hemmed in on all sides by the troops of Ultramontanism, and if the dagger of Ravaillac had not prematurely struck him down, he would no doubt have crushed for ever the joint efforts of the Vatican and the Escurial. This task was reserved for Richelieu. The limits of France, said the cardinal, must be those of Gaul. On his accession to power he renewed all the treaties made by Henry IV with Venice, Savoy, Holland, and England. He broke the projected marriage of the Prince of Wales, Charles I, with a Spanish infanta, and proposed to the young prince the hand of Henrietta, sister of Louis XIII. That was the first challenge thrown down to Spain. The War of the Valtelline, which occurred almost simultaneously in 1624, was the second. This small district, forming a communication between the Spanish Milanese and the Austrian Tyrol, had for its inhabitants a population, Catholic indeed, but subject to the Protestant Grisons, and which had revolted against Spain on account of the erection of certain fortresses constructed by the government of Madrid for the ostensible purpose of keeping off the heretics, 1620. The rich valley of the Valtelline, watered by the Adda, and extending from the Lake of Como to the Tyrol, had belonged for upwards of a century to the Republic of the Grisons, to whom the Dukes of Milan had ceded it at the time of the wars between France and Italy. By virtue of its geographical position, it was very naturally coveted by the two branches of the House of Austria, who only waited for a favourable opportunity of seizing it. The difference of religion which separated the Protestant Grisons from the Catholic Valtellines seemed to hasten this catastrophe. In 1620 the latter, headed by a nobleman of the name of Giacomo Robustelli, revolted and called in the Spanish general Gomez de Figueroa, Duke of Feria, to their assistance. During the same year the Emperor, with the help of Spaniards, had gained the famous battle of Prague, which gave a wonderful turn to his affairs, whilst it ruined those of the Palatine and of the other Protestant princes, his allies. At that time the Duke of Feria was governor of the Milanese, an ambitious and vain man, anxious at any price to create a confusion, brouiller les cartes, and have himself talked about. He saw that he could do so without much obstacle, since the Grisons gave him some pretext to invade the Valtelline, the possession of which was of first-rate importance to the King of Spain, both for the preservation of his domains in Italy and also for the weakening of other potentates in that country. He considered that the Protestants were chastised, the King of France occupied by his civil wars, and the King of England engaged in the hope of marrying the prince his son with the Infanta of Spain. The Infanta Maria Anna, second daughter of Philip III. And Margaret of Austria. She married in 1631 Ferdinand of Austria, who afterwards became the Emperor Ferdinand III. Back to main text. He therefore attempted and accomplished the conquest of the Valtelline in the manner and with the success which everyone knows. The Italian princes became alarmed, the Swiss were offended, and the king, Louis XIII., their ally, determined upon procuring the restitution and restoration of that province to the Grisons, its lawful masters, and with that view he despatched me as ambassador extraordinary for the purpose of asking it back again from the King of Spain, his father-in-law. Bassompierre, Memoir, Vol. 2, 242, 243. Back to main text. As a compensation for his assistance, the Duc de Feria obtained the surrender of all the fortified places in the valley. Madrid and Vienna thus were able, so to say, to join hands across the Alps, and France lost the only road it had to enter Italy. The Duke of Savoy and the Republic of Venice, still more threatened by this bold and disloyal stroke of the Austrian policy than France itself, sent in their complaints to Paris, and, as we have just seen, Marshal Bassompierre was ordered to go to Madrid and remonstrate with the Spanish government. Philip II. Gave to Louis XIII. Nothing but a deceptive satisfaction, and the Duke of Feria not only refused to abandon his conquest, but strengthened himself in it by fresh usurpations. Such was the state of things in December 1622, when Louis XI. Met at Lyons his brother-in-law, the Prince of Piedmont, and the Venetian ambassador, who had come to plead before him the cause of Italy. Richelieu gave to the king, through the medium of Marie de Medici, the advice which a sound and firm system of policy suggested. Without actually declaring war against Spain, he would have made it quite clear that such an eventuality was highly probable. His suggestions were unfortunately not adopted, and when Louis XIII. Returned to Paris, nothing had been decided. An arrangement, however, was subsequently agreed upon, by virtue of which the positions in the Valtelline were to be given up in trust to the Pope, till the difference was completely and satisfactorily settled. The Spaniards, let us add, never entirely abandoned their conquests, and the Austrians would not relinquish the places they had taken from the Grisons. The court of the Vatican would have probably decided in favour of the cabinet of Madrid, if Richelieu, just arrived at the head of affairs, had not interfered at once. He wrote to the French ambassador at Rome, "The king does not mean to be trifled with any longer. The cabinet is changed, and the new ministry has adopted a different system. An army shall be sent into the Valtelline to stop the hesitation of the Pope and bring the Spaniards to their senses." Shortly after, the Marquis de Coeuvres entered Switzerland at the head of an army of 10,000 men, and restored the Valtelline to the Grisons, 1624. The court of Madrid showed its weakness by putting up with the insult and signing the Peace of Monson, which was merely the ratification of accomplished facts. Another important event proved a few years later that the boasted power of Spain had come to an end, and that the time was no more when a sign from the Escurial struck terror from one end of Europe to the other. Charles de Gonzague, Duc de Nevers, a French prince, had inherited the Duchy of Mantua and the Marquisate of Montferrat at the time when Richelieu was besieging La Rochelle. The Spaniards, anxious to secure a footing in Italy, opposed to him as rival claimants the Duke of Guastalla at Mantua, and Victor Amadeus, Duke of Savoy, in the Montferrat. They even laid siege to Casale. Charles de Gonzague asked for the assistance of Louis XIII, as being a French subject, and both the king and Richelieu marched in person towards the Alps, at the head of an army of 30,000 men. Marshal Bassompierre has related all this episode in so picturesque and amusing a style that the best thing we can do is to give here a translation of his narrative. The king, having appointed his brother to the duty of relieving the besieged city of Casale, soon imagined that the glory acquired by Monsieur would be to the detriment of his own. So great is the power of jealousy between relations, and he took it so much to heart that he could not rest in consequence. On the 8th of January 1629 he came to Chaillot, where I happened to be, having business with the cardinal, who resided there at the time. He immediately closeted himself with Monseigneur, and began by telling him that he could not bear to see his brother commanding his army on the other side of the Alps. That business must be stopped, said he. The cardinal answered that the only way of stopping it was that his Majesty should take the command himself. If he made up his mind to do so, he must start within a week at the latest. The king assented immediately. Turning round at the same time, he called me. I was standing at the other end of the room. I approached, and he said to me, "And here is someone who will come with me and serve me faithfully." Having asked where his Majesty expected me to go, he answered, "To Italy, where I mean to drive the enemy from before Casale, and you will serve me faithfully. So get ready to start, and act as my lieutenant general under my brother, if he chooses to join us. I shall take with you Marshal Crequi, who knows the country, and I trust that we shall give a good account of ourselves." Hereupon the king returned to Paris and informed the queen of his resolutions. She told it in turn to Monsieur, who was not much pleased with it. He did not, however, show any sign of dissatisfaction, but prepared to go. The king had the first start, and appointed our rendezvous at Grenoble. The day before his departure he knew that I had not much money to spare. He asked me for some cider which he wanted to take with him. I used to give him an excellent brew, which some of my Normandy friends sent me, knowing that I am rather fond of it. I forwarded to him 12 bottles, and in the course of the evening, as I was taking the watchword from him, he said to me, "Betstein, you have given me 12 bottles of cider. I present you with 12,000 crowns in return. Go to Defia. He will deliver them over to you." "Sire," I answered, "I have the whole cask of cider at home, and I can let you have it at the same price." But he was satisfied with the 12 bottles and with his liberality. On Tuesday, March 6th, the king arrived at Chaumont about 2 o'clock in the morning with the Counts de Soissons, de Longueville, de Moret, Marshals Schomberg, d'Allouin, de la Valette, and others. Our troops passed on, namely 7 companies of the Guards, 6 of the Swiss, 19 of the regiment of Navarre, 14 of that of Estissac, 15 of that of Sceaux, besides the king's mounted musketeers. About 6 o'clock in the morning, M. de Crequi and I, assisted by M. de la Valette, Valençay, Toiras, Canaple, and Tavannes, got our troops into order. The king arrived at the same time with the count and the cardinal. He insisted that his musketeers should do duty with the forlorn hope of the Guards. The pass of Suza, through which the French army had to make way, was protected by 3 barricades. We must quote Bassompierre's interesting account of his interview with the king immediately before the attack. "Sire, sire," said I, "the company is ready, the violins have arrived, and the masqueraders are at the door. When your Majesty pleases, we shall proceed with the ballet." The king drew near to me and exclaimed in a passion, "Do you know that we have only 5 pounds weight of lead in the artillery park?" I said to him, "It is fine time indeed to think of all this." Must the ballet not come off because one of the masqueraders is not ready? Leave it to us, sire, and all will go on capitally. Do you answer for it? Said he to me. It would be rash in me, replied I, to pledge myself to so doubtful a thing, but yet I affirm that we shall get out of it creditably, or I shall be either killed or a prisoner. Yes, but if we fail, I shall reproach you for it. Only let us act. Then the cardinal said to him, Sire, the appearance of the marshal makes me anticipate a good result, depend upon it. Louis XIII. On this occasion displayed his father's courage. The Duke of Savoy, witnessing the impetuosity of the assailants, and on the point of being taken prisoner, exclaimed, Gentlemen, let me pass through, for these fellows seem rather cross. He hastened to sign the Treaty of Suza. The Spaniards on their side raised the siege of Casale and retired into the Milanese. The Duke of Savoy could not be relied upon. The cardinal said of him that his mind took no rest, but went round the world every day more than 3 times, thinking of setting all the kings at war against one another, in order to profit by their divisions. The year had not elapsed when the imperial forces, victorious in Germany, invaded the territory of the Grisons. The Spaniards entered the marquisate of Montferrat, and the Duke of Savoy negotiated with everybody. Richelieu returned toward the Alps, followed by 40,000 men. Savoy was conquered, and the Pignerol taken, March 1630. The Peace of Cherasco, concluded by Cardinal Mazarin, strengthened the French influence in Italy. The Duke of Mantua was re-established in his dominions, and by a clever stratagem the important position of Pignerol remained in the hands of the French, thus securing to them a free passage across the Alps. Had not Richelieu's attention been elsewhere engaged, he would have organised an Italian confederation for the purpose of counteracting and destroying the Spanish influence. Venice, Mantua, and the Duke of Savoy signed the treaty which formed the basis of that league. The Grand Duke of Tuscany, Genoa, and the Prince of Parma and Modena adhered to it in secret. Pope Urban VIII. Was on the point of following their example. The events which were taking place in Germany, however, put a stop to that scheme, as it did to many others. End of section 12.